बार्सिलोना फाइनली रेडी फॉर द चैंपियंस लीग? अगर आप बार्सिलोना फैन हो तो एक बात ऑनेस्टली बताओ, क्या बार्सिलोना फाइनली वो टीम बन चुकी है जो चैंपियंस लीग जीत सकती है? बिकॉज डोमेस्टिक फुटबॉल में बार्सिलोना ने ऑलरेडी प्रूव कर दिया है कि हैंसी फ्लिक के अंडर ये टीम काफी सीरियस है. बैक टू बैक ला लीगा टाइटल्स, young players who are no longer just prospects but genuine first team stars. Lamine Yamal, Pedri, Gavi, Kubarsi, Fermin Lopez. और अभी बार्सिलोना they have also started adding players who fit Flick's football rather than simply buying big names. But Champions League is a completely different beast. Because यूरोप में एक बैड डिफेंसिव ट्रांजिशन, एक रॉन्ग डिसीजन, एक इंजरी, एक 2-4 मिनट का कोलैप्स और पूरा सीजन खत्म. एंड दैट इज एग्जैक्टली व्हाट हैपेंड लास्ट सीजन. इफ यू रिमेंबर, बार्सिलोना reached the Champions League quarterfinals, beat Newcastle convincingly in the round of 16, but then Atletico Madrid eliminated them 3-2 on aggregate, despite Barca winning the second leg 2-1. So today we are going to ask one very simple question. Has Barcelona built a squad capable of winning the Champions League? And to answer that, we need to talk about everything. Who has arrived, who has left, why did Barça sign Anthony Gordon, why Karim Adeyemi, why is Rodri suddenly becoming such a massive priority, why is Julian Alvarez still the dream number 9, what happens to Ferran Torres, what happens to Ronaldo Araujo, what happens when Frankie de Jong comes back, and most importantly, what does Flick actually want this Barcelona team to become? Because I think Barcelona's transfer window is telling us something very different, something very important. This isn't just about adding quality. This is about building a team specifically for Europe. Do we know where Barca stands right now? Let's start with the big picture. Barcelona are not rebuilding anymore. We know that. That is important. A few years ago, Barca were rebuilding. Financial problems, squad imbalance, huge contracts, aging players, youngsters being thrown into the first team because there weren't many alternatives. But that's not the situation anymore. Now the question isn't, can Barcelona compete? They clearly can. The question is, can Barcelona dominate Europe? And there is a huge difference between the two. Because domestically, Barcelona can overwhelm teams through possession, intensity, technical quality, individual brilliance. But Champions League football tests something else. Can you control transitions? Can you survive against a team that refuses to press? Can you defend your box? Can you win ugly? Can you manage a 1-0 lead away from home? Can you bench change a quarter-final game? And most importantly, can you survive injuries? That last part is becoming incredibly important this summer. Because Barcelona's squad has enormous quality, but there are still some positions where one injury can completely change the structure. And Frankie de Jong is the perfect example. De Jong suffered a knee injury during pre-season and current squad tracking list his expected return around early October. So immediately Barcelona have a problem, because if you are Hansi Flick and you lose Frankie, who gives you that control like Frankie? Pedri can obviously help, Gavi can help, Marc Bernal can help, Dani Olmo can play deeper, but none of them give you exactly the same profile. And that explains why the Rodri situation is so important. The transfer window, who has arrived? Let's talk about the new signings. And I think Barcelona's approach this summer is actually quite interesting. Because they are not simply buying superstars. They are buying players who can fit into Flick's football. The first major signing was Anthony Gordon. दूसरी मेजर साइनिंग थी करीम अदियामी की. एंड आई एक्चुअली रियली लाइक द लॉजिक बिहाइंड दिस ट्रांसफर, बिकॉज गॉर्डन isn't just a winger, he is a player who can run, he is a player who can press, he can attack space, he can play wide, And most importantly, Barcelona believe he can also operate as a striker. Barcelona officially announced Gordon as their first signing on of 2026-27 season with a contract running until 2031. The club describes him as a powerful, hard-working winger who can also play as an out-and-out striker. And that last part is very important because under Flick, your attackers can't just stand around waiting for the ball. They have to work, they have to press, they have to attack space, they have to make runs behind the defensive line. And Gordon fits that philosophy. Then came Karim Adeyemi, and this is another very interesting signing. Barcelona officially completed Adeyemi's transfer from Borussia Dortmund on July 23rd with German forward signing until 2031. Now Adeyemi is different from Gordon. Gordon gives you aggression and versatility. Adeyemi gives you the explosiveness, pure pace, and that can completely change how Barcelona attack. Imagine a Champions League night, Champions League opponent sitting high. You have Pedri receiving between the lines, Lamine Yamal isolated on the right, Rafinha or Gordon on the left, and suddenly Adeyemi is making a run behind the centre backs. That's a completely different problem for the defenders. And this is something Barcelona lacked at times. They had brilliant technical players, but sometimes the attack became too predictable. Everything went through Yamal, everything went through Pedri, everything had to be perfect. Adding players who can simply destroy space gives Flick another weapon. And that's the keyword for this transfer window, weapons. Barcelona don't just need more possession, they need more ways to hurt elite teams. Now let's get to the two names that could completely change this squad, Rodri and Julian Alvarez. Let's start with Rodri. Because Rodri, this one makes tactical sense. Barcelona's interest in Rodri has intensified with reports saying Barca have made an eye-opening offer while Manchester City are holding out for a significantly high fee. Rodri is also in the final year of his City contract, which is one reason the situation has become so interesting. Now forget the transfer fee for a second, forget Real Madrid, forget the headlines. Ask yourself, does Barcelona need Rodri? My answer is yes. But not because Barcelona don't have midfielders. They have plenty. They have plenty of midfielders who can control the game. They need Rodri because he gives them something different. Pedri is an artist. Gavi is very aggressive. You have Fermin Lopez who is aggressive and very much attacking minded. So Bernal also has potential. But Rodri provides you the structure. He understands where to stand. He controls tempo of the games. He protects the defense. He can receive under pressure. And he can slow a match down. That's something Barcelona desperately need in Champions League knockout football. Because Flick's system is inherently risky. Barcelona press high, they defend high, they push fullbacks forward. They commit numbers going forward. And when that press is beaten, there can be a huge amount of space behind. A player like Rodri can help reduce that chaos. But there is one massive problem. He is 30. He is also recovering from back surgery. So Barcelona can't just look at Rodri as a 5-year project. This would be a win now signing. And honestly, that's exactly what Barcelona needs. Because this squad is young, Yamal is 19, Kubarsi 19, Pedri is 23, Gavi is 21, Bernal is 19. You don't necessarily need another 19-year-old. You need someone who walks into that dressing room and says, I have been here. I have won at the highest level. Follow me. That's what Rodri could potentially provide. Now, let's talk about Julian Alvarez. This is where things get really interesting. Because Barcelona need a number 9. Robert Lewandowski is gone after 4 seasons at Barca. With the Polish striker now continuing his career at Chicago Fire, his final Barcelona season produced 19 goals in 46 appearances across competitions. Since Lewandowski has left, that leaves a huge question. Who is the striker? Ferran Torres is going to PSG, possibly no longer with Barcelona. Anthony Gordon, possible. But is that enough to win the Champions League? I'm not convinced. That's why Julian Alvarez makes so much sense. He's not just a goal scorer. He can press, he can link play, he can drop deep, he can attack space, he can combine with Yamal, he can combine with Pedri, and he can play in front too. The problem, Atletico don't want to sell him. Barcelona's interests have been strong, but Atletico have made it very clear that they consider Alvarez extremely difficult to acquire. And this is where Barca have to be careful. You cannot destroy your financial structure just to sign one player. But because Barcelona's financial limitations are still real. The club has improved dramatically from its worst period. But La Liga's financial controls still influence what Barca can do in the midfield, what Barca can do in the market. So, if Julian is impossible, Barcelona need plan B. But they absolutely need a proper number 9. Now let's talk about who is leaving. And Barcelona have already made some significant decisions. Ansu Fati has left permanently for Monaco. After years of injuries and inconsistent opportunities, Barca decided it was time to move on. The club officially confirmed the transfer on June 30, while retaining a percentage of any future sale. Inaki Pena has also left for another European team. Again, this makes sense. Barcelona have Joan Garcia, they have Szczesny, and Pena's departure is understandable from a squad management perspective. Then there is Joao Cancelo. Barcelona are likely to acquire his services again after his loan period ended. Marcus Rashford has also left for United since his loan period was over this June. So suddenly Barcelona have to rethink the entire left side of the attack. They have brought in Gordon, but perhaps the biggest surprise, Ronald Araujo. Liverpool have agreed a season-long loan for Araujo with an option to buy reported in the deal. And this is one of the most controversial decisions of the summer. Ronald Araujo isn't some random squad player. He is a former captain. He is physically elite. He is fast. He can defend large spaces. He has Champions League experience. So why let him go? The answer appears to be squad hierarchy. Flick doesn't seem to view Araujo as an automatic starter anymore. And Barcelona have Kubarsi, Koundé, Christensen, Eric Garcia and others. But here is where I disagree slightly. If Barca are serious about winning the Champions League, I don't love losing Araujo without immediately replacing him. Because Champions League football is where you need defenders who can survive 1v1 situations. And if Barcelona play that high line, you need recovery pace, you need physicality. You need someone who can defend 40 meters behind the ball. Araujo can do that. So for me, this is one of the biggest risks of the summer. Barcelona needs to go into the market and bring in somebody else who can replace Araujo. What does Hansi Flick want? We need to talk about this as well. Because here is the thing. You can buy Rodri, you can buy Julian, you can buy Gordon, you have already bought Adiami. But if the system doesn't evolve, none of it matters. Hansi Flick has already established the identity. High line, high press, aggressive possession, quick combinations, vertical attacks and constant pressure after losing the ball. But I think season 3 under Flick needs one major adjustment: control. Last season Barcelona sometimes played football like they were trying to win every match 5-0. And honestly, that's entertaining. That's entertaining for Barca. That's entertaining for fans. But Europe doesn't always reward that. Sometimes you need to win 2-0. Sometimes you need to win 1-0. Sometimes you need to kill the game. Imagine Barcelona leading a PSG match with 2-1 with 15 minutes left in the Champions League quarter final. Do you still press like crazy? Do you keep the defensive line at midfield? Or do you control possession? Slow the game down. Make PSG chase. This is where Pedri becomes unbelievably important. Because Pedri isn't just there to create, he can control rhythm, and if Rodri comes, that combination could become devastating. Rodri behind Pedri. Pedri controlling the tempo, Gavi providing aggression, and then Yamal receiving the ball in the final third. That's terrifying midfield to attack connection. Now let's talk about the biggest threat, injuries. Because honestly, this might decide Barcelona's season more than any transfer. Frankie de Jong is currently dealing with a knee injury and is expected by current squad tracking to return around early October. Fermin Lopez has likely returned from the injury. And then there is the bigger picture. Barcelona's biggest stars have played an enormous amount of football. Lamine Yamal, Pedri, Gavi, Dani Olmo, Rafinha, Cubarsí, and many of them have gone through the World Cup as well. That means Flick has to manage minutes. Because here is the nightmare scenario. Barcelona starts brilliantly. They dominate La Liga, Yamal is scoring, Pedri is controlling games, Adiame is flying, Gordon is contributing. And then February arrives, Champions League knockout rounds. Suddenly Pedri has a muscular problem, Yamal has 50 games, Gavi is carrying a knock, and you are back to relying on youngsters. That's why squad depth matters. And I actually think this is where Barcelona are becoming better. They now have multiple players for most attacking positions. They have young players coming through. And players like Gordon and Adiame can give Flick completely different profiles. The goal shouldn't be to have one perfect 11. The goal should be to have two different ways of winning a football match. What should we expect this season? So, what should actually we expect from Barcelona's team? Let's divide it into three phases. Phase 1, August to November. This is about building chemistry, especially because the World Cup has disrupted pre-season preparations. Barcelona's current pre-season has also given opportunities to young players. In the August 8 triangular tournament in Udine, Barça used heavily rotated sides, beat Nottingham Forest and lost to Udinese. So don't judge the team based on those results. Pre-season is about fitness, integration, testing formations, and giving youngsters minutes. The important thing will be how quickly does Gordon understand Flick's pressing? How quickly does Adiame understand the positional structure? How does Flick compensate for De Jong's absence? And who becomes the number 9? Phase 2, December to February. This is where the season starts becoming crucial. The Champions League phase becomes important. Squad rotation becomes critical. And this is where Rodri's situation could become decisive. If Barca sign him, suddenly the midfield has a completely different level of control. If they don't, Flick has to find another solution. Phase 3, March to May. This is the real test, because if Barcelona reach the Champions League quarterfinals again, then nobody cares how good they looked in September. That's when you need experience. That's when you need your best players healthy. That's when you need your bench. And that's when you need to prove that Barcelona have learned from the last season. Let's talk. Is Barcelona ready to win the Champions League? So, the million-dollar question, is Barcelona ready to win the Champions League? My answer is almost. And I don't say that because I'm trying to be conservative. I genuinely think Barcelona are closer than they have been in years. They have the superstar Lamine Yamal. They have the midfield magician Pedri. They have the aggression Gavi and Fermin. They have one of the Europe's most exciting young centre-backs, Cubarsí. They have an elite attacking threat in Rafinha. They have added Gordon. They have added Adiame. They have a coach who has already transformed their mentality. And they have a squad that is still incredibly young. But there are three conditions. Condition 1, they need a number 9. If Julian Alvarez happens, huge. If not, Barcelona need another elite striker. Because Champions League knockout football eventually comes down to one thing. Who puts the ball in the net? You cannot expect Yamal to create everything. You cannot expect Rafinha to do everything. You cannot expect Pedri to control everything. Someone has to finish. Condition 2, they need midfield control. If Rodri arrives, Barcelona becomes a significantly more complete team. Not necessarily more entertaining, not necessarily more dominant in possession, but more mature, more difficult to counter, more capable of controlling knockout matches. If Rodri doesn't arrive, Flick has to find another way. Let's talk about condition 3. They have to stay healthy. This is the biggest one. Because if Yamal, Pedri, Gavi, Kubarsi and the midfield core are healthy in April, Barcelona can beat anyone. Anyone. But if injuries hit at the wrong moment, the Champions League becomes incredibly difficult. And that brings me to the final prediction. I don't think Barcelona should go into this season saying we must win the Champions League. That's too simplistic. They should go into this season saying we have to become the team nobody wants to face in April. That's different because if Barcelona reach April with their best 11 healthy, if Yamal is fully fit, if Pedri is controlling games, if Gavi is flying, if Kubarsi has another year of experience, if the number 9 delivers, and if Flick learns to control the games rather than constantly trying to destroy opponents, then yes, Barcelona can win the Champions League. Not because they are Barcelona, not because of history, not because of the badge, but because the actual football team is finally starting to make sense. And that's the biggest difference. This isn't the Barcelona of 5 years ago. This isn't a team desperately trying to recreate Messi era Barca. This is something different. It's young, it's aggressive, it's fearless, it's unpredictable, and maybe, just maybe, it's finally ready for Europe. So I'll leave you with this. Barca have spent years trying to get back to the top. Now they don't need to get back, they need to go beyond where they were. Because La Liga is no longer the question. The Copa isn't the question. The question is simple. Can Hansi Flick take this generation of Barca players and turn into Champions League winners? I think we are about to find out. Let's go. Forca Barca.